Welcome, everybody. Oh, works. My name is Ron. I'm the executive director of Men Having Babies. And welcome to what we call the pre-conference events we're having here today at the Hilton. As you all, I'm sure, know, we're having a large conference tomorrow. And we were hoping to have an opportunity before we get to that conference, which is going to be primarily about how to become a parent. We wanted to take a little time, since we had the opportunity, to pause and ask ourselves some more general questions, kind of like set the stage, understand the context of, where this conference is taking place. Because once you get there tomorrow, it's going to be obviously still, such that it's going to be relevant and suitable for Europeans, but it's going to be mostly about the United States, because the options we're going to talk about tomorrow are either adoption or primarily surrogacy from the United States. But we're in Europe, and we are extremely happy to be partnering with a lot of Europeans to bring this conference, especially people from Meerden Gewens, the Dutch organization that have been very cooperative and partners to this. We want to ask ourselves first, why is it that it is so complicated here? Why had we had to jump through so many hoops and so many overcome so many obstacles to even have this conference? What's going on here? So some of you probably know and live and breathe these issues, but we thought it might be interesting to pause, because what we're hoping is that as we move forward together as gay parents, gay prospective parents from across both sides at least of the ocean, we can find ways we can make this a smoother, better journey for all of us in the future. So what we're pausing here first to ask is, what are the obstacles that exist for gay men to become parents? Very few options. What are perhaps the root causes for some of these obstacles? Because some of them are structural, but some of them are cultural and more ingrained in attitudes and opinions in society. And see, maybe we can talk together about some of the things that might be different, or the dynamics in this situation in the future, and what we can do to affect that. I just want to say that we also had a very interesting discussion just about an hour ago, where we got together with basically representatives or people from different countries throughout the continent who are represented here. And I have to say, we have people coming from 10 different countries to this conference. We have obviously a good amount of Belgians, but we have an equal number of Dutch, a similar number of French coming, and then people coming from as far as Ireland and Bulgaria, definitely the UK, Germany, Portugal, Spain, and Switzerland. So many of these countries were represented in the discussion we had before, where we were trying to talk about how we can cooperate about these issues, such that there is better understanding about our families. I should have started by saying that I'm extremely lucky to have 14-and-a-half-year-old twins from surrogacy. And when we have conferences like this in New York, they usually help at the registration desk. There are people there who met them. And last year we had in New York a panel where teens like them spoke about their experiences growing up as kids in gay families and kids that were brought to the world with the help of surrogacy. So this is soon going to be about your kids, and it's going to be how your kids are going to be accepted in your countries. So that's why we want to try this, help this conversation along. And I'm going to hand it over to Marcin, who had been extremely instrumental as both, drawing from his own personal lives and experiences, but also as a social scientist dealing with these issues. And I think what we'll probably do is eventually everybody will present themselves, or I'll let you decide on those things. So Marcin's going to be facilitating for the most part. I'm going to be sitting there and possibly taking part to some extent as well. Our goal, I know we're starting a little later, our goal is to try to have about I don't know, 45 minutes or so of a discussion led by Marcin at the panel, but then also open it up because there's so many people here that are extremely active in these fields personally and through associations or through research, and we'd love to open it to more of you to participate in this, because this is not so much of a presentation as much as a discussion. So please, Marcin, and I'll chime in later if I needed to.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well? Yeah. Thank you very much, Ron, and thanks to everyone for coming here. As Ron has just introduced, for the first part of this round table, actually it's not round, but almost, we're trying to discuss the issues of gay parenting, including surrogacy, with, actually, first of all, I'm a sociologist, but here we have three important people who have worked on this from the legal perspective. In the United States, Steve, in the Netherlands, Wilma, and in France, Clélia. I'm a sociologist on my part. I worked for almost 10 years in Spain at the University of Barcelona, and I worked there on surrogacy carried out by Spanish gay fathers transnationally a lot. Now I'm working from the University of Berkeley, California, University of California at Berkeley, doing also research on surrogacy. And that's why I'm here too, so that's on my part. Before we actually discuss, I would like to briefly introduce a few subjects. I don't want to be speaking for too long, so just briefly, on gay parenting in general, as you know, it has always existed. First of all, it was mainly gay fathers, lesbian mothers with children from previous heterosexual relationships, and now increasingly we've been having more and more co-parenting arrangements, adoptions, and surrogacy arrangements, so mainly these three forms. Now, parents' motivations vary quite a lot when they choose one of these three ways to parenthood, because in co-parenting, where it's normally men and women who collaborate to raise children together, but without living together, normally, in co-parenting, the motivations are a little bit different in general as compared to adoption and surrogacy. In adoption and surrogacy, parents usually want to create their own what they call autonomous families or households. So this is one of the main motivations that here differentiates parents. Another one, of course, is access. Access in many different ways. Access to information, because even a few years ago in Spain, surrogacy, for example, was actually not well known, and many people did not actually know that they had access to this. So access to information, legal access, because as you know, there are many legal issues, especially in inter-country surrogacy. An example, if surrogacy is carried out in the United States, for example, and a couple wants to come back with the child to Spain, they will have to resolve at least two issues: the child's legal residence, so that's the first thing, and secondly, the non-biological fathers, in this case, parenting rights. So there are legal issues here to be resolved. And thirdly, financial, yes. Access to information, legal access, and financial access. You will hear also probably quite a lot about this during this conference. Ron has commented and will be commenting tomorrow also about the financial assistance program and these issues. But the reality is that many couples that I have interviewed have said, well, we can't do surrogacy, for example. It's so simply too expensive. So that's financial access and social class issues deeply involved in this. So that's about the main introduction. And just a few words also before we debate about adoption, which has opened to many gay and lesbian couples, especially throughout the last decade in Europe, after same-sex marriage was introduced. Adoption, as many of you probably know, is still not an easy option. Many couples do this. I have worked with many couples who have adopted, or single people, but there are few children for domestic adoption, first of all, in Europe. So people resort to transnational adoption, but in transnational adoption, many countries do not allow single people or gay or lesbian couples adopt. So it is not easy either. You must look for the window of time when a given country is open to this type of adoption. And also there are long bureaucratic processes involved, as you know, of screening on the part of the state, which is, first of all, the famous parental suitability certificate, age limitations for parents. So all this, plus the last thing, some intended parents do not feel prepared for adoption because they are afraid that there would be children with challenging backgrounds or older children. Of course, there are many fabulous associations who do counseling all this, who help in this, but still some parents prefer to choose, for example, surrogacy and be in this process of raising the child from the very beginning, right? So here about the different motivations. And this is before surrogacy or adoption. One last comment about the after, because we are now talking about the way to parenthood, but there is also an after, which is when you already have children, right? What happens then? I'm speaking on the part of social research, let's say, here, representing on this panel. So just to summarize, as you probably also know, this research has been showing, especially throughout the last years, that children fare well, family fare well, the parties involved in the process fare well. So that's first of all the psychological research done first of all by the Center for Family Research at the University of Cambridge in the UK, but also in other countries. In Spain, for example, Maria del Mar Gonzalez in the University of Granada has done similar research. So there's more and more, which confirms that the controversial issue for some people years ago of psychological development of children is okay. So that's one part. Then there is also an issue of social reception of the families. I have worked with adoptive and surrogacy families in Spain, and in my research I have seen that they were very well received. Maybe they faced some reactions of surprise, for example, on the part of children's mates at school. They were initially surprised or they didn't understand, but as soon as the parents got involved in the community, it got normalized very quickly. So there were no major incidents of bullying, no major problems. Of course, Spain is not representative for all Europe, but in part I would say it is. Because it used to be conservative under Franco's regime, and now it's been changing a lot. So in a way, it joins the two histories that you can see in Europe. So that's about the reception of children. And finally, how do parents help? The parents normally take on the politics, let's say, of normalization. Yes, that's what you can see in all research. That's what you can see when you speak with the families. The parents just try to normalize their existence. So in academia, you have this debate about queer activism and normal families. Yes, there are queer activists who want to be different, who want to show that gay and lesbian families are different in some way. But the parents, gay and lesbian parents that I have interviewed, that you read about in research, normally want to be normal. They don't want to do any subversive revolution. They just want to live with their children in their communities normally, and they want to normalize their existence. So normalization is one of the key words there. Some activists might consider it correct, others not, but that's what the majority of the parents and associations also do, and that's what works, because you see that those families are more and more included in their communities. Here we are coming to the questions that we'll be discussing. We are trying to see why in Europe still it is not so straightforward to become parents for both lesbian and especially gay parents. Why? Because we see all this research, we see all those families, but still there are difficulties. So why are those difficulties there, and how to face them? Maybe for a start, I think it would be good to set the context of this debate to hear about the French and Dutch experiences, right? But first of all, maybe I would like to ask Wilma about the dynamics of gay parenting in general, and also adoption and surrogacy in particular in the Netherlands, because the Netherlands was one of the first European countries to legalize gay marriage 10 years ago. So after 1 decade of this, Wilma, how would you evaluate the current dynamics? Is it easy for gay and lesbian people to have children or not? What challenges are they facing?
Well, I'm a lawyer in Amsterdam, and but first of all, I'm a lesbian mother myself, and our son is now 22. I remember when we were talking about having children together, there was an exhibition in one of the museums in Amsterdam called Goed Verkeerd, it means wrong and good and wrong, and it was about homosexuality during the ages. And we were with our lesbian women group, we were there at the opening of this exhibition. And then the gay men who were there, we were with some children, and they were really angry of us because we were behaving ourselves like heterosexual. And that's I think what was special for men, because the women had find out that being lesbian wouldn't be saying that you can't have children and raising children. But the men were not that far at that moment. And I think there is a special, it started in the gay man scene, that they thought, well, being gay will not mean that you can have a child together with your dearest partner, even when he's a man. So I think that's the first thing, that it's also something of emancipation in the own group. 25 years ago, we were discussing, was it responsible to raise a child with 2 women, and we had a lot of discussions also with other lesbian women about that. But well, we are just a normal family, and I think the society in the Netherlands saw that too. When you are in a new environment, in a campsite, for example, then you got all those silly questions, not from the children, but from their parents, and the children say the words of their parents. But it's now more, everybody knows a neighbor who has a niece who is, and so on. And I think now more and more the men are coming up, and well, we also, the people from Meerder Gewenst try to have good information also in the media about how it is to have two fathers.
And Wilma, in the Netherlands at the moment, also legally speaking, what are the current dynamics? Do people adopt, or do people go for inter-country surrogacy? Is there any change in this?
Yeah. Well, when we started with Meerder Gewenst, I had a speech, and then the audience were nearly all women, and now I think it's at least half and half. But and so it's maybe even sometimes more men than women. So it's there needs to have this information, and I think it's the first thing is the information, and but people choosing doing co-parenting because they say, well, we think it's a good idea that the child knows its own mother and have contact with the mother as well. So it's a choice, and adoption is possible in the Netherlands, but most adoptions are coming from abroad, and there are not so many children. I think only 500 a year in the Netherlands, and they're special needs children. So it's very difficult to raise such a child. Well, so that's why people are looking for a surrogate, and it's high technology. IVF surrogacy is difficult. It's not possible for gay people to do this surrogacy in the Netherlands. So you have to go abroad with your surrogate and your egg donor and let it do there. So it's quite complicated. People are doing it when the surrogate is bearing her own child from her own eggs. That's possible. So they're all options, but. Right. Because it's quite restricted, people are going abroad to do the surrogacy abroad.
Right. We will be speaking just in a moment about also some predictions about this change in the years to come. But we would like to also hear about the French situation from Clélia, who has worked also from the legal perspective, helping parents in France. So, Clélia, what does the process look like in France? We had gay marriage legalized 2 years ago. There were huge protests, but it was legalized. And now, do people have children? Do gay men have children in France? How? What difficulties they face?
Hello. The situation in France, to go to the core of the topic, well, the situation in France for gay parenting has evolved. As Marcin said, it changed 2 years ago with the new law for the Marriage for Everyone Act. So gay marriage was authorized 2 years ago, and at the same time, it was made possible for married couples to adopt children. This means two things. On the one hand, once you are married and that you are a gay couple, and only if you are married, this is what you have to understand with the current law, then you can be a candidate to jointly adopt a child internationally. It can be done internationally. You can submit a request, and theoretically, you can adopt a child. on the second hand, it's the second option that was massively used since the law changed. It's the possibility to adopt the child of your spouse. But the problem is that today in France, for gay people, to become the legal parent of the same child, you're forced to get married. The couples who broke up before the law was adopted, couples of women especially, they cannot become the legal parents of the children that they have raised together. And when it comes to gay parenting, with this law, we managed to increase the security level of families, but there remains a lot to be done. For gay men, gay couples in France, they focus on co-parenting in France. And for 2 or 3 years, they really focused on surrogacy. The problem is that surrogacy is forbidden in France. It is sanctioned in civil courts, but it's also a criminal violation, let's say. And confronted to this legal situation, many gay couples go abroad. It's what Marcin talked about in his speech. It's about access to information. It's about access to legal services. And it's very often mentioned. It's financial means are very important as well.
Now, for gay couples, gay male couples who have started writing up files to adopt with their spouse, those have been handed in. One has been handed in, and I'm expecting the results. Looking forward to the results right now. Now, I'd like to be able to tell you what the result is, but I'm not able right now. And we have started to hand in those files, but we're going to be having to face a major legal obstacle, which is legal fraud. Fraud against French law, which will mean that courts will not be legalizing these adoptions because they will have been the result of a surrogacy. So far, there's been no decision in France on that point. That's simply a prognosis I'm making. I won't go into the details, but that has to do with the topic of adopting a spouse's child. And also, there are issues in France when it comes to having a surrogacy conceived child back into France. In the USA, it wasn't much of an issue, but in Russia, they were stuck. In India, sometimes they were stuck for 3 years. Things were very difficult. So these men were saying, well, we're not too keen on co-parenting because co-parenting isn't bi-parenting. So, of course, people prefer surrogacy, and then they go abroad. And, of course, there's a cost that's associated. And, of course, you have a lot of legal uncertainties. Now, this is no longer the case, but up until 2 years ago, the question was whether you would even be able to come back with your child. Now, we've overcome that stage, more or less. But what we're facing today is the recognition of the legal status of that child and their French citizenship. And you may know this. France was sentenced by the European Court of Justice in June of 2014. And I'm very happy to tell you that it's actually completely useless. It serves no purpose. Now, I'm joking to a certain extent, because symbolically speaking, of course, this is something that's extremely significant. But when it comes to practical aspects, whereas French law and the case law of the Cassation Court is always constant here, they have to apply the sentences of the European Court of Justice. In this case, it's not being applied. Today we have situations where you have children, where you have to say, well, with the current situation, please don't request anything. We as lawyers say this. Don't even request the legal status to be transcribed or to have French nationality. Put all of that aside. We're going to wait for judges, for French politicians to progress somewhat. And what's important as well is for them to have access to social security, these children, for them to be registered in nurseries, to have access to schools, etc. That's what's important. So right now, it's a real mess. A very tiring one, very tiring for parents. Well, the children themselves are quite young, so they don't really notice what's going on. Today, the situation is that concerning surrogacy in France, we're not even starting to think how we're going to have people become parents. We're still at the stage where we want to normalize the assimilation of those children who didn't choose how they were conceived, who arrived in these families as we all do. They didn't choose their parents. We don't choose our parents. And they still don't get a right to nationality or to appear in the National Civil Register. So it's not a very bright situation, not for gay parenting in France, but for everything that has to do with surrogacy. I've tried to sum things up. Of course, you will have all the time you want to ask me any questions later on.
Thank you very much for this, giving us this context about the Netherlands and France. And I would go from here directly to ask a question to Steve, who could draw on his experience of legal work on surrogacy in the United States. I think it would be very interesting to try to ask, when you, Steve, were working in the US states where surrogacy was not legal at some stage, and later it was legalized, how did it happen? And what concerns and issues did those states have at that stage? How were they overcome?
So I get to talk about 50 countries, and they only get to talk about one. Because each state in the United States is like a different country. The issues relating to surrogacy and parentage for both straight and gay couples are distinctly state law and not federal law. So every time you go to a different state, you have different rules and different outcomes. The development of surrogacy law in the United States has tracked the type of surrogacy that's been used. In the 1980s, the primary way of doing surrogacy was traditional surrogacy, where you artificially inseminate the carrier, and the carrier is the biological mother. Under the parentage law in effect at that time, that caused a problem for the courts, because a biological mother that gave up her child traditionally had to do it through adoption, and writing a surrogacy contract could not circumvent that. In 1987, the first highly publicized court case in the US, Baby M, was a traditional surrogate that wanted to keep her child, and the court in New Jersey said, "We have no choice, we have to let you keep the child." Within the 6 or 7 years after that case, based on the traditional surrogacy model, approximately 10 states specifically passed law criminalizing or otherwise restricting surrogacy. Over that same time period, in vitro fertilization became reliable, and the process moved to gestational carriers, women who were not biologically related to the child. And the next important break point was the California case in Johnson v. Calvert that said if an intended mother provides the egg and a surrogate gestates, as between the two, the intended mother is the legal mother. And gestational carriers became the norm, and people stopped doing traditional surrogacy. From that date on, in 1993 to the current date, approximately 20 states have passed legislation for surrogacy, and all of them have permitted it or facilitated it. So in the United States, the perception and difference in the legal effect between traditional surrogacy and gestational surrogacy had a huge impact on the development of the law. Now, the other panelists have talked about how gay rights impact your ability to become parents. It's important to understand that you have a double curse in the eyes of moral conservatives. And the bigger one is that you have to use surrogacy because society doesn't like surrogacy for heterosexual couples either. And there are huge moral dilemmas and a lot of resistance from an odd coalition of opponents to try to ban surrogacy that's still ongoing in the United States. The coalition against surrogacy, which has something to do but not everything to do with gay rights, is the Catholic Church, because if you're Catholic, you cannot have a child unless you have sexual relations within your marriage. You cannot do artificial insemination, you cannot do in vitro fertilization, you cannot do surrogacy. It's illicit and unholy. So the Catholic Church and any political entity that has any influence from the church is going to be inclined against surrogacy for that reason. You have the pro-life movement because surrogacy in gestational carriers requires the creation of an embryo. And not all embryos are transferred, and some of them are stored. And when they're stored and not used, they can be destroyed, and that becomes to them a life-threatening issue, tantamount to abortion. The interesting element is the feminists. There is a strong element of the feminist movement that is opposed to surrogacy because they find it to be the financial coercion of women against their best interests. They argue incorrectly, but that doesn't stop them, that only poor women have children for rich people. That's not true. I've done a study in Minnesota. The average personal income of a carrier in Minnesota is $40,000 a year, and the average household income of a surrogate in Minnesota is over $100,000 a year. The average education of a surrogate in Minnesota is high school plus 3.5 years of college. These are not uneducated poor women, and yet the feminists argue that they are, and they go to the legislatures, and they misrepresent facts, and when we don't have hard statistics to respond, their facts become believed by the legislators. And then the fourth part of the coalition are those people that don't believe that gay men should have children. Just the same group that doesn't believe gay men should get married. Who are they? It is so normal. So the United States is still fighting this struggle, and in Europe, the struggle was fought a long time ago, and the European and the US systems are philosophically different in that in the United States, we have Supreme Court law that says a woman can control her right to govern her pregnancy, which means she can get an abortion. That's an extremely limited right in the European Union, and most people that I've talked to believe that an embryo is a person upon fertilization. That dichotomy creates a different perspective in Europe than in the United States. In the United States, we have a Supreme Court opinion that says the ability to procreate, to have children, is a constitutional right under the U.S. Constitution. That right does not exist in most of the European Union in your constitutions or laws. In addition, I think that the healthcare system is different in that in Europe, almost 100% of the consequences of IVF and surrogacy, whether it's multiple births or intensive care for children, the bad outcomes that cause high medical costs are all covered by the government, including the IVF procedures and the means of getting pregnant. So there's a social expense tag attached to surrogacy that in the United States, the insurance companies just say, we're not going to cover your IVF, and we're going to exclude that from insurance, and the government is not involved in that. And the final piece is that in the United States, there's an extreme hands-off policy when it comes to government and doctors. Historically, no governmental entity interferes with the patient-doctor relationship or legislates health care requirements. That's not the case in Europe. The governments are perfectly capable of making medical decisions even though they're politicians. Again, I don't know how that works either. But those distinctions make the hill to climb in the European Union much steeper than in the United States, and yet still in the United States, we're still fighting the same battle.
Can I just say something quickly? It's interesting that there's the law, there's there's ideology, and you mentioned the Catholic Church, and then there's the decision or the structural circumstances that cause things to become politicized. So I think that you probably would agree with me that surrogacy is seldomly politicized and becomes a partisan issue in the United States. Just as much as you know, the Catholic Church can decide which of those topics, because there's so many things you can go wrong with them, but which of them they really want to focus on. So you know, each pope can change the perception, but I don't hear Catholic people in the United States talking about surrogacy. The states where the surrogacy issues have been debated, it has been barely covered. It has been definitely not. No politician that I know of ran on the platform of yes or no to surrogacy. Not at least am I wrong? I'm saying how many of them are there?
In Minnesota, there are a lot.
Okay, so I don't know. In New York, it's still an issue that hasn't been settled, and certainly, you know, there isn't a single congressman or senator or any national, you know, level politician, and certainly even in New York, there are very few state-level politicians that are talking about it. So there's so many other issues perhaps they can deal with. So I think the issue here is, and when it comes to society, you know, people might have opinions, and there are, you know, there are obviously feminists, there are obviously people who are stand on this and that regarding assisted reproduction, but it's not a combustive, potent issue as it is in Europe. So I think, you know, for us coming back and forth, it is very strange to see it, that it is so potent and so, I mean, my phone keeps ringing from journalists who want to cover that. That wouldn't happen in New York. We would have to, beg them to cover our conferences. So the question, so to me, the puzzle here is, why is it such a uphill battle for you? And I think the difference here is that, to some extent at least, not even in our communities is there consensus, in the LGBT community, is there a consensus that it is a pity that you cannot become parents. What you discussed before, the right for procreation, regardless of where it is exactly in the Constitution, in the United States, if you say, I have a right to become a parent, people will nod. And here, I don't think people will say, yes, you have the right to be a parent. So I think, you know, maybe the question here is how, you know, what is missing here in the discussion, or what are things that we can fill into this discussion that will make it more, humane and understandable, that you have here real suffering. You have people who feel, that's how I felt, that and I'm not saying you need to feel that way, or people outside of this room, but I felt I was not a complete human being without being able to have a family. And I don't think there's a lot of empathy here, not even from our lesbian sisters in Europe, to the fact, they're looking for some sort of an ideal world where the state would pay for us to become parents through surrogacy, only through women who do it for absolutely free. And until that happens, we can sit and wait. So for me, it's really, I'm really angry about this. Can't we do something to change this? Because there's so many people who want to become parents.
I think that, yes, it works. Thank you for these contributions, because I would also add, I much agree with Ron about this interpretation of the difference between the US and Europe here. I would add one more thing. From my work on surrogacy, I think that while the issue of gay parenting in general has been changing slowly, and it is more and more accepted in Europe too, the issue of surrogacy is this contentious subject still in Europe, whereas in the US it is not so much. And I think the main issue here is about compensation, because surrogacy, as opposed to other ways of becoming parents, gay parents, requires a year of a woman's life dedicated to this, and which requires some kind of compensation. As also Steve rightly mentioned, there are two different philosophies. In the US context, where free market has been a tradition always, it embraces this compensation. In Europe, on the other hand, we have the government paternalism and government idealism. It is the government that solves those things. So the philosophy is totally different, and any association of reproduction with anything commercial is directly very controversial. Even this very conference, I talked to a Belgian colleague yesterday who works here at the university, and he was commenting that this very conference seemed to him and to many Belgian colleagues of his controversial, because there is this meeting between reproduction and the commercial. And to Europeans, this we are accustomed to our governments solving those issues, and to the welfare state, and to the free healthcare system. So directly, this meeting of these two issues seems controversial to us, so I think that's one of the main issues, and it needs to be solved somehow. There are attempts at this. One attempt is, of course, the so-called altruistic surrogacy, like in the UK, for example. Also, the Netherlands, Denmark, Greece, to some limited extent, are working on this. So this is this kind of, let's say, European, also Canadian model. Another attempt are ethical guidelines, because people don't know, people are afraid of how it works. We mentioned feminist objections. So, of course, these objections were born, first of all, in relation with surrogacy in countries such as India, because there have been reports, Amrita Pandey's or Sama Association's reports from India, which indicated the vulnerable situation of Indian surrogates, for example. It is not confirmed 100% that each one of them is forced to do this, but their situation is vulnerable, structurally speaking. So these concerns were born, first of all, in that context. Now, as Steve mentioned, in the US is different. Normally, that's why there's also differentiation. Spain, for example, does recognize the majority of surrogacy carried out in the US, while it does not recognize surrogacy carried out elsewhere. So there are different attempts at working on these guidelines. Also, the Hague Convention on Inter-Country Adoption has started working on some convention about ethical guidelines on surrogacy. We're wondering, speaking before, if actually this is realistic, if we can work, if we can establish any ethical guidelines and legal guidelines, much more difficult, for inter-country surrogacy, for example. So I think that would be my last question for a very brief comment from any of the speakers, actually. And I would open our debate to any other questions and comments from you, from the audience. Just very briefly, if we could still comment on this, do you think that it is realistic, or it's totally futuristic and impossible to come to some international or inter-country guidelines on surrogacy, for example?
Well, I'll comment first. I was the president of the American Bar Association Assisted Reproductive Technology for the last 7 years. And I've been working with that national and international organization in developing proposed national legislation in the US, which is controversial, and working with The Hague to try to figure out whether they should go forward with the process. And our position was that they should not. The problem, as you indicated, is the United States has a platform for surrogacy. We've had 3 waves of feminism. The women in the United States are very strong, and on the internet I would virtually allege that surrogates are unionized because they're sharing information and making their demands consistent. So you have one process that follows very ethical guidelines in a situation where women are not socially vulnerable, and then you have India or similar places where it's paternalistic, there's a caste system, it's parental where they still arrange some marriages, and the women have very low power and they come from the lower levels. So the possibility of human rights violations exists and does happen. And when you decide as parents whether you want to go to India or the US, one of your decisions is, how do I feel about participating in a process because of cost that is more likely to result in a woman's rights being violated? If that doesn't matter to you, it doesn't matter to you, and if that's the only place you can go, then you should go there, but the US doesn't have that issue. As for The Hague, I don't know how they align 2 such disparate processes and regulate them the same when they're so different. It's like you said, Spain recognizes US surrogacies. It doesn't represent or accept the Indian surrogacies as readily. So when I was at the Aberdeen conference, which was a fact-gathering conference by Hugh Beaumont and Katerina Trimmings in Aberdeen, Scotland, they invited lawyers and academics from 20 or more different European countries, and they all presented on what the law was or was going to be in those countries. And the kinds of things they talked about were, well, you can do surrogacy, but you can't pay the surrogate. You can do surrogacy, but it has to be a family member. And they came up with all kinds of restrictions that the politicians were talking about in Europe that frankly would result in surrogacy not being viable. You can legalize surrogacy, but if you ban compensation, very few women are going to step forward to do it. That's the situation in the UK, and a lot of my clients are Canadian, and surrogacy is legal up there, you just can't pay them, so they all come down to the US to do surrogacy. So I'm skeptical, and yet The Hague is going to proceed. And they have now appointed a panel of experts. They're going to discuss it and try to come up with limitations. And then it will be a question of what states sign on. And I work with the State Department in the United States, and the State Department's position at The Hague when they decided on the panel of experts is no we shouldn't have one, no, we shouldn't have a convention, and the only voice saying that was the United States, and the State Department officials said, it's really weird because all of our usual allies like Canada and Australia are against us on this one. So we have a lone voice that's opposing this process. I think the process will go forward. I think it's too complex to have a satisfactory conclusion.
Right. Any other comments on
Well,
this? Yeah.
I think it is quite a complex thing, but for the adoption we have quite a well-working convention. But I was thinking, well, we don't have a constitution in the Netherlands saying you have the right to have children, but we have a kind of constitution even more important than our constitution, and that are international conventions, like the European Convention on Human Rights and the International Convention for the Rights of Children. And, well, both the US are not doing it, right? Only 2 states from the UN who are not in the Convention for the Rights of Children. And that one is Somalian, you can understand. And the other one is the USA. So it's one of the things we have this right for family life and private life in the European Convention for Human Rights, but it's not the right to have children, to choose for children your own. The other thing, and it's come from the International Convention for the Rights of Children, is that the best interest is that the child has the right to know its parents and to be raised by his parents, but it doesn't say who its parents are, either the genetic parents or either the social parents. So that's, it's both possible to say this convention. So when you have a convention and you can, well, vary it in interpreting it, maybe it will work. And I think international cooperation is very, very important in this kind of business.
Thank you for these important comments, Wilma.
Hi. Sorry. I have a question for Wilma Eusman. Because when there's a child born in the United States through surrogacy, it's now very difficult to get a French nationality and having both parents recognized in France. So the situation is you have a kid that is born in the United States, and when you come back home, it's very difficult to get both parental rights and nationality recognized. Is it the same in the Netherlands? Is it possible to have Dutch nationality for a child born in the US through commercial surrogacy?
What is, let me say this first, it's a criminal act to be a mediator between a surrogate and intended parents. Otherwise, it's also forbidden to announce that you are looking for a surrogate or that you want to be a surrogate. Those things are forbidden, and it's forbidden to pay for sperm, for eggs, for embryos, and for children. So that doesn't mean that you can't pay a woman for her services being your surrogate. So even in the Netherlands, it's possible to pay a surrogate for her carrying your child. It's possible to become the legal father of a child in the U.S. By a court order in the U.S. saying that your parenthood will be established. When the surrogate is married, it's strictly necessary that the fatherhood, legal fatherhood of the husband is denied by the U.S. court, and the legal fatherhood of the intended parent, mostly also the genetic parent, is established, and then you can travel back to the Netherlands, and the Dutch authorities will accept this court order and saying, okay, this is your child, this is you are Dutch, so the child is Dutch. It will be different when you are French or Portuguese, then it depends on your national law. But as long as you are Dutch, it's no problem, and your child will be it's also a Dutch national. And after 1 year, your partner can do the second parent adoption, and then both of you are the legal parents of the child. So there's no, well, it's a process, but it's possible.
I have a question for the audience, and more particularly for Mr. Snyder, if that's okay. I'm Georges Levesque, I'm a gay dad via surrogacy, and also deliver babies for a living because I'm an obstetrician. And my prime concern has always been the safety of the mother, of the children too, but this physical safety of the mother with respect to pregnancy and delivery. I'm just wondering if you agree, perhaps, that if we were more, not restrictive, but have a more structured safety net program for the mothers, for the potential surrogate carriers, that were established by physicians, because I find that physicians sometimes have been, I don't want to say excluded from that discussion, but those of us who deliver babies are very concerned about the safety. If there were guidelines, more strict guidelines established by our organization, things are more likely to run smoothly in terms of creating a better legal frame and context. Because as it is now, it seems to me that it is very, very restrictive in some countries in Europe and the rest of the world. On the other hand, it might be a bit of the Wild West when it comes to the US with respect to legislation about ART and surrogacy.
As I mentioned previously, there's a very hands-off policy between the government and physicians in terms of doctor-patient relationship and practice of medicine. So I highly doubt there will be governmental restriction or legislation that dictates how fertility procedures are done, in particular with regard to the safety of the mother and the children, how many embryos are transferred, and whether you have a multiple gestation, which I think is the biggest risk. There are medical organizations that have guidelines. The guidelines have no effective consequences if they're not followed, so there are people that don't follow them, and therein lies the perception of the wild, wild west. I think as a practical matter, everyone going into surrogacy should understand what I've observed over 25 years of doing this. The primary motivators of many or multiple embryo transfers are the parents, perhaps financial, perhaps wanting a family faster and all at the same time. Then it's the physicians who want to increase their success rates and don't want to disappoint their patients, so that if patients want twins, they don't effectively advocate otherwise. And then it's the other professionals in the industry that I think don't adequately discuss the consequences. I understand surrogacy is an expensive process. I understand that because of that, you're lucky if you can afford it once, let alone twice. And if you want 2 children, the viable economic option is to have twins. I do believe that that needs to continue to be an option in some cases, but I don't think it should be the norm. And I believe that anybody that wants twins and puts 2 embryos in hoping for twins has to be aware of this outcome. This outcome is not for everyone, it's not the majority, but it's a realistic option. And when I advise my clients, I always say, think about the worst case scenario. If you're not willing to accept the worst case scenario, then don't start down that road in the beginning. The worst case scenario, and I've seen it 3 times in my several hundred surrogacies, are twins that everybody's happy to have, followed by a delivery at 28 or 29 weeks, followed by one of the twins dying, and the other twin having severe developmental challenges. So that is a possibility with twins, and you just have to accept that risk. So balance all of those options, but do I believe we should have regulations that move us towards single embryo transfer and a reduction in costs of the process to make that viable for more parents? Yes.
I think
sorry.
I need to, maybe one more question.
Microphone.
I'm just saying last question because we're about.
All right, just to repeat, we'll take the last question because we'll be running
It's
out
not
of
really a
time.
question, actually. It's just a comment as an intended parent.
Right.
I think as intended parents, you don't put two embryos because you want to have twins necessarily. You just want to increase your chance of having given one. That's, I think, the main driver, at least for intended parents. So, please be careful when you make such statements, because it's not necessarily that you necessarily want to have twins or hoping for twins. You're just simply increasing the chances.
Right, and putting two embryos in will increase your likelihood of a pregnancy, but it will also create about a 40% chance of twins, so they go hand in hand. And that goes hand in hand with the development of the medical community to make the success rates of a single embryo transfer equivalent to a two embryo transfer, and those success rates are narrowing and are almost the same now. So that is a legitimate issue, but it's becoming less and less of an issue.
I would just add here to summarize that another very important guideline is some autonomy and of women who are surrogates and the voices from them. In the research that I have been doing and the interviews with surrogates, they have insisted, and you can ask them because they are here also, yeah, some of them, that some kind of autonomy of decision and respect for their also medical decisions would be an important criterion to take into account. So there must be a dialogue. That's some parents forget about it. I've seen it in my interviews. Forget about this dialogue because we are so focused on what is going on. But this is, I think, an important guideline to be working on, just to add to the guidelines subject. And I think we need to be finishing here because there are other points on the agenda. I hope that this small debate has helped to set a background for the rest of the conference, actually for the entire conference, and has helped to prepare the right questions that we may also ask tomorrow in the specific panels, because we have all day tomorrow of specific panels. So please remember the questions that have emerged now and take them to those specific panels and to the people who are here, to surrogates who are here, agencies who are here, practitioners who are here, other intended parents. Please just speak to them, take your questions, and thank you once again. Thanks to all the speakers for your contributions. For me, it has been very, very interesting and a lot of new information and contributions. I hope that for others too. So thanks to all of you for coming too. For questions, if anyone has other questions, all of us are here, both today and tomorrow. So please feel free to come up. We'll be happy to converse, to speak, and to continue. So thanks a lot again.